Hello everybody, this is part 2 of the ultimate IS300 2JZ GE maintenance guide. I just want to mention one thing about part 1 of the video. Disconnect your negative terminal on your battery before you do all of this maintenance stuff. I did put it as a pinned comment, but it's not included in the video. That's it, that's all I wanted to mention. Part 1 focused on the disassembly. This video is going to focus on installing all the new parts into the engine. So, let's go. Go! Before you install the new seals, you want to just clean this little groove out here. Make sure there's no leftover old oil in there. And then make sure you clean the front and the top as well. And then you're going to grab a Brillo pad and just sand down the area that the bearing cap is gonna connect to. And make sure to clean off the Brillo pad dust. Here is the part number for both seals, they're both the same. In the manual it says that you should put a little bit of lithium grease on the inside of the seal before you install it. After that you can just slot it over the top of the camshaft and press it in with your thumbs, I find is the best way. Then just make sure you use a Brillo pad to clean the other surface as well. It's going to mate to the top of the cylinder head. Give it a little clean as well, make sure all that oil is out the way. And also you want to put some sealant between the two surfaces when you fit these. I didn't show it here, but I did do it. Then you want to reinstall the bolts, and you're going to torque these both down to 20 Newton meters. I then used a metal cylinder from a ball joint press kit just to hammer it in place and make sure that it was in there all the way. So the second one is just exactly the same really. There's no different to the first. Just make sure you give it a good clean, get all the oil out, and then you can grease the inside of this new seal and just press it in. This one's a little bit harder because it's got the bearing cap on still. You'll know when it's in because you'll hear this sound, it's solid. Then you can put the bolts back in and torque them down to 20 Newton meters just like the other one. Next you can install the cover that we took off earlier, and these bolts, there's 4, one left, right, on bottom and middle, and you torque them down to 8 Newton meters, so it's not very much, don't over tighten them. Now you can install the Vvti cam gear. Make sure that the keyway lines up and you push it all the way on. After this, you're going to rotate it all the way clockwise. I'll explain why a little bit later. Next, you can install the exhaust side. Make sure it's on the right way. And when you're installing the bolt, just hold the hex portion of the camshaft with the wrench again and tighten it down to 79 Newton meters. Install the 10mm bolt into the intake side and tighten this down to 79 Newton meters as well. Now I used a lot of engine degreaser and brake cleaner to clean the valve covers. I was going to paint them, but I think I'll do that later on with the engine build. Here I'm just spraying in the groove where the new seal is going to sit. If you're going to do this, make sure it's completely dry before you install the seal because you don't want to degrade it. So this is all clean now, ready to go back on, and here's the new gasket. This is the exhaust side, and here's the part number for that. So before you install the valve covers, you want to put some sealant in some very particular places. This is just so it doesn't leak. It's usually at the corners. I'll show you exactly where it is now. If we just freeze here a second, you'll see where the old sealant was, right here. You want to clean that off first and get it as clean as you can. And you want to add some in, and if we look at the valve covers here, you'll see where those parts line up right here. It's a common area for oil to leak out of here, so you definitely want to add some sealant here to prevent leaks. Before you install the valve covers though, you want to make sure that all of the areas, the mating surfaces, are super clean, as clean as you can get them. this will limit you having leaks when you install them again, which has happened to me in the past. So make sure you clean them as much as you can. Here I'm just adding the sealant in the places that I mentioned before. Just wear gloves though, because this stuff isn't very friendly to your skin. So now I'll show you on the exhaust side. You got some sealant here, you got some more here on the other side, and then on the intake side, you want it on both sides as well. So here I am installing the new gasket into the exhaust side, I believe. Now the corners are by far the worst part here because it doesn't seem to quite 100% fit. You're just gonna have to play around with it for a while. Usually there's some slack in the straights or sometimes slack at the corners. But yeah, just keep persevering, take your time, don't rush it. And obviously make sure that you're using the exhaust side gasket in the exhaust side and vice versa. Here I'm just checking the corner here. This was the worst part for me, this little corner. But you just got to keep on going. When you're installing them, it's just pretty much the same as when they came out. The big problem is that plastic casing that holds all the wiring loom. I really recommend you take that off. Find some way to disconnect that completely. If you undo the alternator cables and all of the surrounding ones, you will be able to do so. It's not smart doing it the way I did it. Just find some way to remove the top wiring loom section and do it properly. So there's something I failed to explain last night. I was having trouble where I would put the Vvti gear back on, and this was not lining up. The dot was not lining up. It was actually here. It was 30 degrees off. The reason is because this sprocket actually moves. This gear actually moves without the cam moving 30 degrees. All right, so just remember that if you put it back on and you tighten it with the hex on the cam and the cam doesn't move and you're still off to the left, you can rotate it back. Don't worry about the cam moving. This takes a lot less effort to move than the cam does, so you can just simply move it back into place. This is because the Vvti cam gear has a 30-degree sort of play in it. Something to do with how Vvti works. So if everything doesn't line up when you put it back together, don't freak out. That is most likely going to be the issue. As long as you haven't moved the cam when you've removed the cam gear, then you should be absolutely fine. Just move it back into place so that the timer mark matches up, so that the dot matches the timer mark on top. Just make sure that the little cylindrical notch on the cam is in the keyway of the Vvti cam gear. That also goes for the exhaust cam gear, but that doesn't have any play in it. It'll just go on one way and that's it. Yesterday I was so tired that I forgot to put the cover back on to the Vvti cam gear. This is only torqued to 15 Newton meters anyway, and I'd already put the intake valve cover back on, so it was too late to use the hex on the cam gear. Sorry, the hex on the camshaft. So when I get the timing belt back on, everything will be in place and I won't need to hold the camshaft. I can just put it back on then. And it's not torqued down very heavy. Basically, I'll just put the 22 back on the crank bolt and then I can torque the cap back on. When I told you at the beginning to keep all your stuff labeled and ordered, this is what I meant. I think it's really important because if there's anything left over and you don't know what it is and you haven't labeled it, it's really frustrating to find, or to try and find where it's from. If you do this, it'll be much easier for you. So go ahead and tighten these down, torque them to 8.3 Newton meters is the exact figure. And you want to go in a particular pattern, obviously not left, right, up, left, right, up, left, right, up to the next set. You want to go left, up, to the right, up, to the left, and repeat. So there's a lot of oil here in the spark plug wells, and I just used some brake cleaner and some cotton buds here to clean it out. I didn't want to take the spark plugs out and have all this crap fall into the engine, so I made sure I just cleaned it as well as I could. Brake cleaner and some cotton buds and tissue and cloths and stuff would be fine. So I put some tissue actually around the spark plugs and into the wells so that when I was cleaning the surrounding areas I didn't get even more oil and dirt into the And then so I just took all of these out and then ready to take the spark plugs out. It's time to remove the spark plugs now, and to do this I'm going to use a 16mm spark plug socket. You don't need a particularly long extension for these, I just used a short one and it was fine. I actually really struggled with the front spark plug, number one. It was insanely tight, so I hope that's not the case for you. So my crappy quality one didn't actually work, it's just cheap China metal. And I had to borrow a really good brand one from a friend across the road. And this one worked perfectly. You don't actually need a spark plug socket. You can just use a normal one, as long as it's deep and it fits in the hole. The reason you don't need a specific spark plug socket is because, unlike other engines, you can actually reach these spark plugs with your fingers and just pull them out. We're going to replace this with original Denso spark plugs. This is the part number. I'm giving you all the part numbers, but I will leave all of them in the description as well. So here I am, just removing all 6 spark plugs with my hands. Quite nice not to have to use the annoying spark plug socket. Here's the new spark plugs. They're all pre-gapped. I didn't actually even check mine before I put them in, but you're welcome to check them. I'll add on the screen here the gap that they're supposed to be. And I find it much easier not to use a ratchet. Sometimes when I'm screwing stuff in, I just use the socket attached to an extension. I think it's just faster than using the ratchet sometimes. So when you're tightening these down, don't do them too tightly. Just very, very lightly at first. When it comes to torquing them down, you want to torque them to about 17 or 18 newton meters. So that's 17.63, which is 13 foot-pounds. So looking at the old spark plugs, cylinders 3 and 4 had a little bit of oil on them on the end. Not really sure what that means, but the car runs fine, so there's no blue smoke out the exhaust or anything like that, so not quite sure why that was the case. Someone definitely over-tightened this one. They were changed, I think, a few years ago, and this is why I had trouble getting it off. So when you put the coil packs back in, it's pretty easy to know which way, because these connectors are all on the left side, including this one on the left side, and this one down here on the left side. And this end can't possibly go on this side, and the front end can't possibly go on the rear end because it won't reach, because of it's all attached to this wire here, this bunch of wires. This one goes in the middle, the one that's not attached to anything. The only other thing you need to know is that when you install them, this metal connection needs to go over the top of the spark plug here, the very tip. So these cables only really go in one way if you keep the cables connected to the clamps and stuff, which I recommend you do because I think it just makes it easier, unless you're replacing some of the spark plug cables or the coil packs. The blue ones have a spring inside, so you don't have to worry about this connector here. It will make contact as long as the spring's inside. The way I'm going to do it with these is I'm going to pull the cable out of the cover. I'm going to make sure it connects, and then I'm going to push the cover back on. So you see how the connector is on the spark plug and the cover is off. Then you just push the cover back on by holding the cable and pushing the cover, and make sure that it slots in to the spark plug hole. This just stops any dirt or oil getting in there. Just be extra careful here because it's so easy to bend these wires and break them. So just like when we remove them, we're going to put the 10mm bolts back in here. This one, and then the one at the end there. And make sure to do this before you secure the bracket down, because you won't be able to access it. The front bracket and the middle bracket are really accessible, but the one in the back is a bit of a pain in the ass. After you've tightened the bolts down for the coil packs, you can attach the brackets. Now, I don't know what the torque settings are for these, but I'm just going to do 8 Newton meters, just the same as the coil packs. Now you can plug the connectors back in. Again, just go easy with these because those clips are really fragile. After 20 years, I snapped 2 of them. So here you can see the top of the oil pan is disgustingly dirty. So I just used a load of brake cleaner and actually a pry bar here to start cleaning it off. It was really bad, and I wanted to get this all clean before I moved on. As you can see here, it's all nice and clean. Makes such a massive difference. So here we're gonna just put the water pump assembly back in. I'm going to add this little washer in, don't forget that, super important. And then we're going to connect the pipe at the end and add the 2 nuts. I couldn't find out what the torque specs were for these were in the manual, but I found out on a forum that they were 20 newton meters. And here we're just going to remove this old seal from the block and replace it with a new one. Before you do so, you want to clean this out. I think I use a screwdriver first as well, just to get like a really tiny screwdriver, and then this cotton bud, and just clean the surface as well with the Brillo pad. And to get all that green dust off, you want to wipe it down after that as well, because that gets everywhere, and you don't want it in your coolant lines or in your engine block or anything. Here's the new seal, and just simply plonk it in. You don't have to add anything. Just push it in, and you should be good to go. So to reinstall the water pump to the block, we're going to use these 6 bolts, starting with these 2 silver ones. So if we get it into position, the first bolt goes in the left hole at the top there, and the second silver bolt goes in the bottom behind the pulley. These are torqued down to 21 newton meters. Add the rest of the bolts in. There's one at the top, one on the right, 2 at the bottom there. And these are also tightened down to 21 newton meters. Make sure you do this in a star pattern as well, because you want this to be uniform pressure across the whole of the water pump. So as for the bypass pipe, you want to clean off the surfaces first, and then you can install it, making sure that the bottom of the pipe is connected into the water pump housing. Then you can install your bolts, and these are torqued down to 9 newton meters, which isn't very much at all. So if you over tighten these and snap them in the block, it's not going to be fun getting them out. Just using a cotton bud here to clean all the coolant off the crank gear. If you remember in the first part of the video, all the water gushed out the block and all over the crank gear. Here's the part number for the new idler, and we're going to install this next. Just remember that there is a bolt that goes in the front of this, and then there's a washer that goes behind, which sits obviously between the idler and the engine block. You don't want to miss this out. Just putting a little bit of blue Loctite on as well, which it says to do in the manual. So this bolt is a 10mm Allen bolt, and you're going to torque it down to 35 newton meters. And this should pivot side to side really easily, just like this. And before we put the belt on, we're going to check that the dots line up with the timer marks at the back and the dot on the crank gear to the block. Here is the part number for the timer belt. It's just one that I bought from Lexus. It's not any kind of special one. The easiest way that I find to do this is to put it on the edge of the crank gear at the bottom there, and then make sure that it's obviously wrapping around the middle of the idler on the left, and then just gently push it onto the top. And then you can go back and forward between pushing it on the top and pushing it on the bottom. So just take your time, take it slow, make sure that you don't move the cam gears. It's unlikely that you will unless you use an excessive force. And obviously you want a lot more slack on the left, because that's where the idler pulley is going to tighten it for you once you pull the pin from the tensioner later on. So the right side of the belt should be relatively tight, but not too tight, because this could mean that you're a tooth or two out. So now we want to check that the marks still line up. Dot and mark at the top, and a dot and the mark at the top there, and then at the bottom we want the dot to be lined up with the dot on the block as well. Next we'll install a washer plate with the concave side pointing outwards. Next we're going to install the bottom timing cover, and I find it easiest to angle it and push it in from the left first. There's 5 bolts that hold the cover on, 1 at the top, 1 at the bottom left, 2 on the right, and 1 behind the water pump pulley on the left. And I couldn't get the torque wrench in there, so I just used a ratchet spanner and hand tightened it. Now I'm going to install the crank pulley, making sure that the keyway lines up and the mark at the top lines up as well. So the keyway should line up with the key here. So we just get it into position and slowly push it on. And as I was pushing, I was just wiggling it from side to side to make it go on easier. and then just knock it with a mallet a bit just to make sure it's all the way on, and recheck the timer marks once again. So we've got the 2 dots lining up with the marks at the top, and the yellow mark on the crank pulley should line up with the 0. Here I'm just loosely installing the crank pulley bolt, and then we're going to install the auto tensioner. Hello, it's day 8 today, and we're going to install the auto tensioner. So you're going to have to use the old bolts for this, the ones from the old auto tensioner. It's not an issue, just make sure they're all in good condition and stuff. These look almost brand new, they're a little bit dirty, but that's okay. I actually forgot to put this cap on the Vvti cam gear. It's the one with the 14mm hex in it. So I'm going to do that once I've got the belt all tensioned up, because then it won't matter if it moves clockwise anyway. So I recommend that when you're doing the auto tensioner, you do it from under the car, otherwise it's inaccessible from above. So before we install this, let me go through it a little bit. What we've got here is the old tensioner, and you can see this part that's sticking out the top there. That is the part that's going to push the idler pulley in to put tension on the belt. This is the dust cap that goes on top, and the reason it's there is because you can see all the dirt in there. It's just to keep the tensioner working properly. As you can see, this one has a pin in, and the reason it has a pin in is because this pin goes through there, and when this is compressed down, it also goes through this hole to keep it in place, and then goes through the back as well. When this is installed and you pull the pin, this is going to pop out and it's going to push into the pulley. The pulley will go to the right and put tension on the belt. So I'm just going to wiggle it through here. Make sure the pin is facing outwards in the little gap underneath. You'll see it. And then we just push in like this, and it'll stay in place so that you can get the bolts in. That's 15. That's 20. That's 27. Now that the auto tension is installed, we're going to pull the pin. This is the ultimate moment of truth. And as you can see, there's some slack on there. Going to grab the pin and we pull. Pin's out. And there you go. Tension. Now we're going to do 2 full rotations clockwise, 720 degrees of the crankshaft, just to make sure that everything is working correctly and everything's smooth. And we're going to come round to the point where the dashes are now at the top and the white mark lines up with the 0. Remember this? This is the cap for the Vvti cam gear. We're going to put this on now. So I've put this tool back on, and I've lowered the car on the jack so that the breaker bar is jammed to the floor. Now I'm going to tighten the crank pulley bolt to 300 Newton meters because that's as high as my torque wrench goes. Then I used an extension bar just to do it that little bit extra because it's supposed to be 330 Newton meters. Remember this? This is the bracket from the power steering, so we're going to put that back on right now. One of these bolts is slightly shorter, this one here, and I'm going to guess that this goes in this hole. Don't forget to put the washer on that one, behind the bracket. So here I'm just reconnecting all of the brackets to the water pump. I'm not quite sure what the torque settings are, but I use the same ones as the water pump, which is 21 Newton meters. Now we're going to refit the alternator using the nut and the bolt. The nut goes on the bottom and the bolt goes in the top, which attaches to the water pump. And you're going to need a 14mm deep socket to tighten the nut. Remember to refasten this clip here. And these are the 3 bolts we're going to use to refit the auxiliary belt tensioner. So that's pretty much done now. The only thing we've got left to do is put the auxiliary belt on. However, I'm not going to do that just now because I want to get to the oil filter. So the oil filter is on the right hand side of the engine and it is right there, right here, behind all those cables. So I'm thinking that I should go in through here, and that I'm not putting the belt on yet because the belt is going to go around this side and I might have a little bit more room if I don't put it on yet. Right, I know this is going to be a struggle, so I've got 3 tools for the job. Chain, grips, and some sort of socket grip thing. From under the car, you can see the oil filter right there. It's going to be a bastard to get to, but I'm going to give it a shot. It's going to be quite hard to film as well, but I'll do my best. You want to get it, you want to get it right on the edge, because that's where there's a little hex portion. Oh no, it seems to be pretty tight. Why would you do this? Did that move? It did move. Okay, it's coming off. Yes, okay. Oil is going to go absolutely everywhere. And I'm not looking forward to it. You know, it would be probably a good idea if I I actually drain the oil first. Yep, let's do that. Try not to spill oil like I did. We got some Lexus 5W30 engine oil, and this is the part number for the oil filter. I've never seen anything like this before. We pull this up. It's like a little funnel. Right, so we're going to get a little bit of this clean engine oil just in this little cup. And we're just going to put some of this oil around the edge of the filter, where the gasket is. Okay, now we're going to install the new oil filter. Oh, for fuck's sake. If we take a look at the manual here, oil capacity with filter is 5.4 litres. It's always easier to pour with the bottle sideways so that it's much more consistent when it comes out. Otherwise it's just going to go everywhere if you try to pour it forwards. So this is a 5 litre bottle, but I've also got a 1 litre bottle, and I'm just going to take it down to the 600 millilitre level, which obviously means that there's 5.4 litres gone into the engine. You might have to top it up later, just check it. Here's a diagram here explaining exactly how the auxiliary belt will go on. It'll go around the water pump, around the power steering pump, around the AC, around the crankshaft, and then around the tensioner and around the alternator. So you'll put this one on last. So when you're doing the auxiliary belt, it's really easy to just loop it around all of the pulleys and then push a little loop through between the water pump and the crank pulley, which goes around the auxiliary belt tensioner. Right, let's take the fans off the old radiator. It's just 3 bolts on the top, 1, 2, 3, and 3 bolts on the bottom, 1, 2, 3. I wonder which is the new one. Oh, look at this. That is disgusting. And then we've got this thing of beauty. So the new Mishimoto one is just a copy of this one, but better. So you've got the main outlet at the top, you've got the main outlet at the bottom, and it's the same on this one. Main outlet, main outlet. You've got a drain plug and a drain plug. You've got this little pipe that goes to the coolant reservoir, and the same on this one. You've got the electrical connector here, and there's a space for that on the new one. All the bolt holes go in exactly the same place. Of course, the capacity is different. The Mishimoto one is a little bit thicker than the stock one. So I'm going to clean the fans up, and then I'm going to fit them to the new radiator. I forgot to mention that the radiator cap is badass, and you've got, of course, Mishimoto logo right here. So I probably spent at least an hour cleaning all of this, and it really took forever, but I recommend you do it. Also, clean the fans, just clean it all up.
And we're funding an FBI to target parents.
Now, with these bolts, I have no idea what the torque spec is, or if there is a torque spec. I just hand tighten them down to what I thought was reasonable. Don't forget to remove the coolant temperature sensor from the old radiator. This plug bolt is a 24mm. It shouldn't be very tight, so you can just unscrew it with your hand. Not sure if this has a torque spec, but I'm just going to hand tighten it. Before we put the radiator in, we're going to put the middle timing cover back on. It's just 3 bolts on this one, and it's torqued down to 8 Newton meters. I had a really hard time trying to torque down this one because it wouldn't fit in. In the end, I think I just hand tightened it instead. It's the same with the top. The top has 4 bolts, and that's torqued down to 8 Newton meters as well. So I've heard from a friend that these rubber mounts here for the radiator might be a little bit too thick, and because he said when his radiator is in, the cap actually touches the bottom of the bonnet. So I'm going to have to test fit it and see what it's like. It's a pretty big gap, so I think my friend was definitely right. The rubber mounts in the bottom just pull out really easily. I'm just going to get a knife and cut down the middle of here and make the thickness about half of what it is now. So I pretty much just put the mounts in the vise and using a knife, cut them down the middle. Okay, I've cut them down quite a bit. Not perfect by any means, but it'll be fine. This is how much I've cut off those two. So these can go in the bin. I'm going to fit these in. So now, because I've lowered the radiator, the brackets don't clamp down on the top properly, so it's a bit wobbly. So I'm going to bend this bracket, I'm going to bend both brackets so that it grips on properly. Here we're going to put the reservoir tube on and tighten the clip. And before I put the radiator hoses on, I just thought I'd clean up this surface because it was full of old coolant. and decided to clean all this oil off the power steering pump as well because it was pretty bad. Some WD-40 and time to push the top hose on. Now I'm not going to lie to you, these were the biggest nightmare ever, and I even almost wouldn't recommend these hoses. I would just go with the stock ones because they are so unbelievably tight. I tried put them in hot water, I tried using WD-40, I tried using fairy liquid, and I would have rather just used the normal ones, if I'm completely honest. It was so bad that I even actually cut my thumbs, both thumbs, trying to tighten it here. And I think I show it here, yeah, so I cut my thumbs. So. Not worth it, in my opinion. As you can see, it's still not really fully on, but I mean, I've bled for this. I can't get it on anymore. Never mind, it'll be alright. I'll sort it out another time. I'm just going to tighten this Jubilee clip. As you can see here, I've just got some washing up liquid and putting the pipe in some hot water in that mug there. And honestly, the bottom one was way worse than the top one. That connection to the radiator, I know it looks completely easy there, but it took me hours to actually get it to fit on. Now you can plug in the coolant temperature sensor, and then you can reconnect the radiator fans. And before you put the coolant in, don't forget to tighten the drain plug on the radiator. Now that the hoses are on, the brackets don't fit again. So in the future, I'm going to have to come up with some sort of custom solution. And after miserably failing to bend the brackets, I just drilled some new holes instead. So before I put all the airbox and throttle body stuff back on, I had to clean the engine bay, because this is what it looked like. I also used some electrical cleaner on all the contacts just to make sure that everything was clean before I put it all back together. And you can see that there's definite carbon buildup inside here. So I just used some carb cleaner on both ends just to clean it all out. And as you can see in the other side, there's a lot of oil buildup, so I again just used the carb cleaner to clean it out. So remember to fit this gasket before you try to connect anything together. You don't want to forget that, otherwise you're going to have a pretty significant leak. So we're going to start by connecting the brackets to these holes at the back here, and then underneath here you got two more holes. And it's really just a case of reversing what you've done before. It is really awkward, so I recommend that you definitely do these back and bottom brackets first on this side of things. It just makes, it's the only way to do it really. There's no other way to get it all together. So I recommend getting these two bolts in on the bottom, holding the brackets for the pipe on, because they're the most annoying and there's no way you can leave them till any other stage really. So I would do these first, and then I would put this bracket on here. So a 10mm bolt goes right in this hole here. I couldn't find any torque specs for these, so I just used my own judgment and hand tightened them. And after you've done that, you can plug in this electrical connector. And then you can put this hose back on too. Remember to put the clip on as well. Now you can put all 6 bolts back in to connect the throttle body system to the intake manifold. Now I couldn't find any torque specs for these bolts, but the manifold to cylinder block is 28 Newton meters, so I just used the same torque spec as that. And to get that final bolt on the left on the bottom there, I had to use this huge extension so that I could get to it. There was no other way for my tools in particular to get there with the torque wrench. So this is a 3/8 inch torque wrench into an adapter to a 1/2 inch, back to a 3/8 inch, and then an extension, and then another extension, and then a 3/8 inch 12mm socket. So there's a few hoses on the top that you need to reconnect. I am not sure of the name of all of them, so I'm just going to let you see exactly what I do. And if you copy this, then you'll definitely be able to put it all back together. There is one that is missing, but I do explain later when I try to start the car that it hasn't been connected. So just bear that in mind. Plug in the throttle position sensor connector, and there's another connector on the other side of the throttle as well that you need to plug in. Now this bracket that connects to the throttle body and to the cylinder block below has 4 nuts, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom, and they're torqued down to 20 Newton meters or 15 pounds-foot. This little bracket is 8 Newton meters. Now, when you put the throttle cable back on, it's much easier to put the cable in first and then attach the bracket. Be very careful when you're tightening these nuts on the bracket because I actually snapped the top one off. I would say tighten these really light. I don't know what the torque spec is, but you can see it snap off right here. There we go. Okay, it's 10 PM at night at the moment, and I'm just gonna clean up all the plastics. I've got some warm soapy water, I've got some Meguiar's Ultimate Black, and some cloths. These are really filthy. I'm going to end up cleaning the rest of the engine bay as well at some point. Right, all the plastic is clean now, and it does look a whole lot better. The airbox was absolutely filthy. I do recommend that you clean it inside because there's a lot of sludge and crap and dust and dirt in there. It's quite difficult to clean because there's all little squares in there, but I highly recommend that you do it. Once again, I think it's best to use cotton buds, and look how filthy they are. Now we're going to use the CRC spray to clean the mass airflow sensor. So if you look down here, you'll be able to see the mass airflow sensor. It's right, that little needle just here. We're going to remove it to clean it, and it's just 2 screws, this one and this one. Then we just carefully pull it out. So what we're looking at here is this part right here. So on this side, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, it looks quite clean. But if we have a look at the other side, it's actually really dirty. If you're going to clean the mass airflow sensor, only use a proper air sensor cleaner, nothing else, because you can damage it. So what we're going to do is just lightly spray the sensor. We'll do this on both sides. Just looking at this now, it looks a lot cleaner, so I'm pretty sure the engine probably wasn't running its best. So now it's just a case of putting this all back together. It's pretty simple. I just hand tightened all the bolts. I didn't find any torque specs or anything for them. Don't really think you need any. Just as long as you don't over tighten stuff, you should be alright. It's just 3 bolts for the airbox section. There's one at the top, there's one slightly below that, and then there's a little secret one down by the radiator. Then you can plug the MAF sensor back in, and then you can change your filter. Take the old one out, put the new one in. I actually ordered the IS300 one by mistake, so I kept the old one in for a little while I was trying to start the car. So this clip is actually from a little bit later, but the new one's in now, and it's running all good. And here's the last piece of the puzzle, the little primary intake section. It's just one bolt there. Again, I just hand tighten these brackets down. And the same with the top here. I didn't use any sort of torque specs, I just put the bolts in and tighten them down by hand. Now, changing the cabin filter is really easy. You just pinch the sides of the glove box to swing it down. And then there's a little panel you need to take off. And you just slide the old one out. It's in this little container. And then you just pull it out and replace it with the new one. Here's the code for it. So it's literally just as simple as pulling the old one out and putting the new one in. It can only go in one way because it's like a spring. And then it just fits under those 4 little tabs. So then you can just slide it back in, put the panel cover back on, and then pinch the sides of the glove box again and push in. Right, I am using the pink Super Long Life Coolant Premixed Toyota one. Got about 10 litres and we're going to fit as much as we can in. Be careful not to pour this in too fast because this is what's going to happen if you do. Final thing is to reconnect your battery, tighten it up, and we're ready to start it up. Okay, it's time to do it. It's time to start it up. Please work, please work. Not sure if this is the problem, but there's a pipe right here that's not connected. So I'm going to connect that and try it again. So this took me a really, really long time to figure out. I spent days, just solid days trying to figure out the problem. It shouldn't have took me that long. Initially I thought it was the crankshaft sensor, and it was the crankshaft sensor, but I went through a load of other things first. The crank position sensor was an intermittent problem, and that's why I had so much trouble figuring it out. It read fine when I checked for resistance, and then the more I checked it, the worse it got, and eventually it just read 1, which is infinite, breaking the circuit. So I checked for spark first, and there was no spark from any of the plugs, so that gave me some sort of direction. I checked the continuity between the spark plug cables and the igniter. Everything was fine. I checked voltage as well. Everything was fine. Checked the resistance of the spark plug cables. All fine. Checked the tolerance, the resistance between the top and the bottom of the coil packs. All in tolerance, no problem. Checked all the fuses, particularly AFI and IGN. Absolutely fine. Charged the battery because it was really low. And I thought, oh, okay, well, this must be it, because it was cranking really slowly and weak. Still nothing. It was fine when it was fully charged. So it cranked, obviously, but it wouldn't start. So something, obviously it wasn't reading right. And I thought, well, sensors, it must be sensors. Initially, I checked the crankshaft sensor, crankshaft position sensor. It was fine. It was okay. But then it started reading infinite, and I thought, well, that's weird. So I checked a couple of other things, went back to it, and checked it was fine again. So I checked the cam shaft position sensors, fine. Went back, took out the crankshaft position sensor, and tested it properly while it was out. There was the problem. It was reading infinite, breaking the circuit, and I knew that was the problem. So I ordered one. It took 3 weeks to arrive. So 2 weeks after it didn't arrive, I ordered another one. So I got 2 on the same day. They arrived at the same time. So let's carry on with the video. I'll show you exactly what's going on and why it reads this way and how I fix the problem. So I removed the alternator, and if you look just behind the tensioner there's a 10mm bolt. So I undone that bolt and removed it just like this. That's the crankshaft position sensor right there. and then the other side of it there's a connection that you've just got to disconnect, and then you undo this 12mm bolt from the bracket on the water pump, and you can pull the sensor right out. So here are my 2 crankshaft position sensors, and if you want the part number for this, then that is what you're looking for. So I've removed the alternator and I've took the old sensor out. Luckily I didn't have to take any of the belt off or anything like that to get to it. This is the new sensor here, so now I'm going to test them with the multimeter and show you why this one is broken and why this one is going to fix the problem, hopefully. So I started by setting the multimeter to 20k ohms. I got the old sensor, put the probes in onto the metal contacts, and you can see that's reading 1 here on the old one, which means it's a break. There's a break in the circuit. And the new one is reading just under 2k ohms, which is absolutely perfectly within tolerance. So I removed the bracket out of the old one and put it onto the new one. And that's pretty much it. I installed it just the way I took it out. I tightened this bolt to 9 Newton meters, and then I reconnected it at the connector and reconnected the bracket to the water pump, and that was pretty much it. And there we go, started right up, which was a huge relief because it really did take me a long time to figure that out. So I put all the intake back on and the radiator, and there we go. So it's likely that you're going to have to bleed the radiator and add some more coolant in later on, take it for a drive, let it settle, and just keep monitoring it. There was absolutely no codes, which I was glad to see. And if we have a look at the RPM, it's running around 700, which is really, really good. So super happy about that. And the temperature's looking all good. Once mine's warmed up, it usually doesn't move from about the halfway position. So that's it. Done. That's it. Thanks for watching the video. I know it was a really long one, but I've tried my best to make the most detailed IS300 2JZG maintenance video possible, at least on the engine. I know that the 2 parts were really long, but I hope I've been successful, and I hope that they were helpful for everyone. I'll leave a link to part 1 in the description, along with all links to all the parts that I used and the torque specs and everything else. I'd like to thank Fred Hornsey, Evan Ortega and Rob Harrington, who helped me diagnose the issues when I was going crazy out of my mind and trying to get the car up and running. So thank you very much to them. If you have any questions, leave a comment below and I'll try my best to help. Please like the video. It took a lot of editing and a lot of time to put together. And subscribe if you want to see this IS300 transform into a 600 wheel horsepower NAT sequential powered monster. That's right, I said sequential. In the future, at some point when I can afford it. I'm not sure if the problem with the crank sensor was due to the fact that the battery was still connected when all of the coolant came gushing out the block when I pulled off the water pump. That's what I think might have damaged it, but I'm not 100% sure. So I really want to move away from the formal style videos that I've made ever since the channel started, really. When I first set out to make the channel, this is not how I envisioned it to be. Although it's really helpful stuff, it's kind of boring sometimes, like for me to make. Sometimes I enjoy it, sometimes it's just really tedious. And I hope that doesn't come across as me being a douchebag or anything. I do enjoy still making the videos, but I'd like to be able to make more of them. And these ones take up a lot of time. So there's big gaps between all of the videos because of that. I just want to be able to tell more of a story about my car journey and stuff. So it's not going to always be like this. I would love to make a daily video on the process as I'm doing it and upload at the end of the night. My upload schedule at the moment isn't very good. It's very far apart. Every video takes, it's a lot of money to make each video at the moment through the content that I'm doing, which is why I've got a new sim rig. There's going to be some videos on that. And I want to go back to, showing people that I want to learn to drift and learn to drive properly, and be on my way to doing all the stuff I wanted to do in Japan. So the channel's going to change a little bit, but I'm going to try and make the quality equal to what it has always been. So even though those changes are going to be made, I really hope that everyone's going to stick around and watch. It's only going to get better. For those of you who have been watching for a while, or new subscribers or whatever, I'm so grateful that you would take the time to even watch a pleb like me just make videos about his car journey. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the future. There's so much cool stuff planned. Can I tell you whose videos I really like? Michael Sabo. Check out Michael Sabo. He builds quad bikes. His content is like mine, but awesome. It's just more enjoyable and more exciting to watch, and his personality comes through and everything. So yeah, anyway, go check him out. I'll leave a link in the description. Anyway, thanks for watching. Really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.